This is a Prezi, not a PowerPoint. So they can zoom in and out a little bit and make people a little bit dizzy. I think they're a bit more fun than making PowerPoints, but if you get dizzy, I'm very sorry. We're talking, being a bit more local now, I'm going to talk a bit about what VASM is and possibly how we can improve things over the next 10 years or so. I thought we'd start off by just really saying, what are the aims of VASM? What we're here for? And from that, I'd say that's probably what we're here for. Mostly, originally, it was to peer review all the surgical deaths. I think we do that quite well. We get a lot of information coming in. We look into in great detail. We get first-line assessments, second-line assessments, and then we do feedback to the surgeons. And the surgeons can complete the audit loop by feeding back to us, and occasionally they do, because occasionally they're a bit pissed off about what has been said by one of the assessors, and then I have to ring them up and try and placate them and go through things like that. But I think that's healthy. We have a discussion about it, and everyone's usually quite happy. From the information that we gather in a de-identified manner, we get a lot of data, and from that we can hopefully educate things. And the way we educate people in the state is by things like this meeting today. So you're all being paid for by Safer Care Victoria, which is very kind, and it's all free and nice attendance, which is great. We also produce booklets, and this is a very popular booklet we produce every year with de-identified cases so that people can hopefully see what sort of problems there are out there and learn from them. And this is read by anybody. It can be read by surgeons, trainees, nurses, hospital administrators. And they're very popular, and the next one should be coming out in the next month or two. And we also, because we do collect a lot of data, produce quite a few papers, and these are published in the peer-reviewed journals. So that's the education aspect dealt with. We're hoping that by passing that information on, we then get improved mortality throughout the state. So this is more difficult to measure. This is a slide I spoke at a few meetings last year about, which shows that there has been a reduction in overall mortality related to surgery in the state over the last 20 years. And it's been a nice downward trend. Claudia, who's not here today, very proudly put in when VASM started, and the trend continued. So that looks all very nice. Bottom line from all of this is that surgery in Victoria, and in most developed countries, is very, very safe. You're looking at about 3 people out of every 1,000 operations dying, and the majority of those people are very ill to start with and having emergency operations. I pinched this slide from Darren, who's talking next. I don't think he's aware that I've pinched it, so he might be showing it himself later, which looks at the overall accrued procedural mortality over the last few years, and it's actually going up. So that's really counter to what we'd like to see. But the preventable, or the preventable deaths are going down, and we classify deaths as preventable. About 10% deaths in the last report were preventable. It's 11% actually, but that's going down. So there's a bit of a sort of conflict there. We're appear to be reducing the number of preventable deaths, but the number of deaths is going up. And a part of that, obviously needs looking into in greater detail, but part of it's because Darren's detail was looking at procedural deaths. So not all procedures are done by surgeons. So you have a lot of endoscopists involved in things, and obviously a lot of cardiology stuff, and that doesn't come across our desk. We'd possibly like to, and we're trying to get the interventional people on board, and they're going to be reporting to us in the future. We might be looking at the GI people in the future, but at the moment they don't. So that's probably explaining why it's going up slightly, because there's more and more interventional procedures and cardiovascular procedures being done not by surgeons. So we may be having an effect, well, it's very difficult to prove, on improving mortality. You probably hear quite a bit about qualified privilege today, and this has probably exercised me more over the last year in this job than anything else. It's really a big issue. And what qualified privilege is, it basically means anyone reporting into the audit has to keep that information within it, putting it very crudely. And it's protected, get the next one up, by Commonwealth legislation. So if you break the qualified privilege, you could end up in jail and end up with a whacking great big fine. So it's very important. It basically means surgeons can report to us without any fear that the information they give us will be released into the public sphere, and it won't be able to be used by lawyers. And equally, the people that do our assessments, the first-line assessors, the second-line assessors, can write what they like in the report, and that won't be released out either. It might upset the people that get the feedback, but it's literally one person. What they do with that information is up to them. So it's very, very protected. And I think it's basically why the audit is taken off, why it has the support of the surgeons, and is a generally good thing. But it's a little bit complicated because there is both Commonwealth legislation and state legislation, and the two are not the same. And we're having a bit of a conflict about what we can and can't do regarding that. I must admit, when we were setting up this seminar, I thought we could probably talk the whole seminar about qualified privilege. It's that big an issue at the moment, but you might get a bit bored. If you are interested, there's quite a decent Commonwealth summary on what qualified privilege is, and also ANZASM has produced this, and these are both available on the internet if you want to look into it in more detail. So very, very important. Next thing is really, this is the bulk of my talk. This is really how we interact with different people, different organizations. And really, what we've got on that diagram there is the people that come to our committee meeting. So these are the people that make VASM work. And in no particular order, we'll go through them in a little bit of detail. Start off with ANZASM. ANZASM is the overarching body looking after all the ASMs throughout the country. So they give us some guidance, they give us some clout. It's based in South Australia. Guy Madden is in charge of it, and he's our lead, and we report to him. And we try and, if we're going to have anything done on a national basis, it isn't just statewide. And they do their own case review booklets, which pinch cases from all around the country, and again, is widely disseminated. They do arrange for all sorts of seminars such as this, and at the annual scientific meeting of RACS, a demonstration of something going on. They produce their own reports, which congregate or collaborate all the stuff that's done around the country, and produce other reports such as this. And I think this is a very important report. We were talking about it earlier this morning. I would like you to take this all back to your hospitals, and this is talking about morbidity and mortality. We look after the mortality, but morbidity is done very badly, I think, in most hospitals, and this is a position paper about how to do morbidity and mortality meetings properly, setting out bronze, silver, and gold standards. So I think it's a very important document, and if you can get that out and about, that would be brilliant. And then Guy is particularly proud of this. This is an app which you can all download from the app stores, which has got the national cases on, so you can sort of get horrible cases about what's been going on in your pocket, show it to your friends and say, this is the sort of thing that's going on, we can do better. So it's a free app available to anyone. So that's about ANZASM, and they come to our committee meetings and tend to phone in from Adelaide whenever they can. I'm not sure whether Helena's here today, but she might be or might not. Surgeons are the lifeblood of our organisation, really. Okay, they do all the operations, they kill all the patients, but we wouldn't be anywhere without the forms being filled in under qualified privilege at the time they're done. And of course they have to do this now because it's one of the CPD things from RACS, which we'll talk about later. But we depend on the surgeons to fill the forms in honestly. We also depend on the assessors we've got, and they're all volunteer assessors, to go through those forms and to go through the second line assessments and spend a lot of time to give their opinion on whether anything happened or not. So we're completely dependent on surgeons. What we hope, and it's good that the most of them do, get this letter from me once the assessment has been done. So about 75% of the cases we go through every year, and the number's getting higher and higher every year, which is good, get this letter, and the bottom line from that is that there's been no problems found, which I think is quite reassuring, because when you do have a surgical death, it's devastating. And you think, yeah, I tend to, and a few we do have in neurology, you do think, could I have done anything better? And it's nice to have someone as a peer writing back saying, look, we haven't found the problem, you couldn't have done much better. And there's a certain amount of leeway in the reports we give as well, and there can be some verbal feedback. And if you get something like this, I think it'd be brilliant. I like seeing these sorts of comments when I go through all the reports, because you think that's going to make the surgeon who gets this pretty happy. And the majority of cases are like this. But unfortunately, there are 20-25% where there are areas of consideration or adverse events or something just could have been done a bit better. And particularly the ones we get concerned about are the adverse events. And about 5% of the cases a year are adverse events as far as we're concerned. And then sometimes the assessors can be quite brutal. I'll give you the rest of the quote. And it's interesting, you know, this particular case, I'm not going to really reveal what specialty it was, but they obviously weren't happy with the way it went, to the point where they felt that some action should be taken. And it was interesting because I can't act on what they've said. Whoever did this assessment obviously felt that as the clinical director, I could actually take this further and report it to either a medical director or to APRA. And I can't. All I can do is report it back to the surgeon. And if they want to report it to their medical director, that's fine. So we don't have that sort of power. And on that list of the things that the audit does, it does not include reporting anybody to an outside body. So we are protected in that. That's part of the qualified privilege. We also produce this. I'm not sure how often surgeons actually bother downloading this, but every surgeon, when it is every surgeon in the state, can get their own individual report. This is mine, so I can do what I like with it. I won't do that one because it identifies a patient. But what it does is it compares your data with both similar people in the state and also nationally. So you can say, am I an outlier? For someone like urology, we don't go around killing too many people, so the numbers are very, very small, and I don't think this has any benefit at all to people who have small numbers of deaths. But for those with cardiologists or cardiothoracic surgeons or neurosurgeons who are getting lots of deaths, there might be some use in that. They might be able to see, are my results completely out where they should be? Most aren't, so I'm not sure about the use of that, but it's something that's available, it's a tool that's available using the data we've got. So that's the deal with the surgeons. This is branded as a Safer Care Victoria meeting. We do work very, very closely with Safer Care Victoria, and in particular with the VSCC, and Trevor Jones, who's the chair of the VSCC, is on our committee, and I go to the VSCC meetings as well, so we do have a dialogue going on regarding that. And also with VCAM, and I see Andrea's here today, and she's on our committee. I don't tend to go to the VCAM meetings, but it just shows that we do have dialogues. We are aware of what's going on all sorts of levels. And I think that's where Safer Care comes in. And we are possibly going to be working closely with them in the future, which I think is a very positive step. Another branch of the government is WAHI, and they produce an awful lot of statistics, which we occasionally use in some of our reports. I think we should be using probably more of them. So we're going to increase our dialogue with WAHI in the future, and WAHI are starting to come to our committee meetings, which I think, again, is a good thing. The college is obviously extremely important, and it's not just our college, it's the gynecologists as well. I'm not sure if Rachel's here today, but we have an obstetrician gynecologist on our committee, and it's not obligatory for gynecologists to report into VASM. It's just voluntary at the moment, but they do have a very high response rate, and we get a lot of interesting cases coming through from the gynecologists. But we have the clout of the college behind us, which I think is very, very important. We have an office. Zooming in, this is our office upstairs. You're not allowed into it because there's a lock and key because of all the important stuff we've got in there. I think we work particularly closely with CPD. If any of the surgeons here are naughty boys or naughty girls, you'll be getting letters from CPD saying you haven't been filling in your VASM stuff. They get the data from us, and if people don't fill in the forms as they should do, they're not compliant with CPD. And they're starting to get a bit more aggressive about this now. They're actually starting to say, if you're not compliant with CPD, you should not be signing up with APRA. You can't say your CME is up to date. And there's been some quite strongly worded letters being sent out to people who haven't been filling their forms in, and a lot of forms got filled in very quickly following that. And CPD are very good. They've been very helpful. If you bring them up, if you're a surgeon, they will be as helpful as possible. And meetings like this, which are CPD approved, it goes automatically onto your CPD for the year. So we're trying to make everything as seamless as possible, and that's all because of our cooperation and working with the college. Hospitals, very important. I've stuck this picture in because when I was preparing this talk, I just stuck on Google Victorian hospitals. And I was quite amused when this came up, which is actually the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle, which is where I did my original training. And actually, Ward 2 is where I did my first ever surgical job, in the sort of bottom left-hand corner there. So it's just as a picture to represent hospitals, really. A little story about this. You'll see Queen Victoria at the front there. She didn't like Newcastle. She used to go through the train to Balmoral on a regular basis. And she apparently thought it was a dirty, disgusting city. So every time she went through it, she had the blinds pulled down. And the freemen of the city found out about this. So when they built the hospital, the story goes, I don't know whether it's true or not, they made the statue face her back facing the hospital. They didn't want her to face the hospital. I think that's probably not true. A, because there's all sorts of other cities in the UK where apparently Victoria didn't like looking at and the blinds were pulled down. And B, it's slightly on a hill, so the statue is fairly prominent. St. James's Park, if anyone knows Newcastle, is just across the road from there, so it's a great thing if you want to go to the football. That's also interesting that Victoria, the state, is named after Queen Victoria. She obviously never came here at all, but at least she came to Newcastle. We work closely with the hospitals. We have a hospital administrator rep, which is actually Erwin Lowe, on our committee at the moment, and we report back to hospitals. I think Darren might mention this in his talk, certainly when we've been reviewed by Aspects. There's a little bit of complaint from the hospitals that they don't get as much information back from us as they possibly could. But we do produce a report which is sent to the hospitals and gives all sorts of data de-identified about what's going on. And we also produce these rather controversial charts here. This one was from last year's report. And the concern from the hospitals, obviously everyone wants to know who number 172 is. I know, but I can't tell you. And this is basically, 172 is a 0.2% outlier. So it's a massive outlier in terms of our chart. But the downside of his chart is it's cumulative. So this is looking at all the data over the whole period of the audit. So if 172 had a particularly bad year, it would take them a number of years to actually get back down to normal, which is a bit tough on them because they can put in remedial positions and it's not going to reflect in our data. So for the next review, we're going to change the way we're presenting this. So we're actually presenting it on an annualized basis. And you can see from this, 172 becomes completely normal, which is great to see. You've got no massive outliers and just a few outliers which just need a bit of help. The hospitals are told where they are regarding this, so they are given advance warning and said, okay, you're a potential outlier here, have a look into it, see if there's anything you can do. So I think we are producing information for hospitals which can be used. We could be better, and I think we'll be working on that in the next report and in future reports. We also produce individual hospital reports, which, like the surgeon's reports, can tell the hospital whether it's similar to hospitals of the same size in the state and also within the country. So they can have a vague idea whether they are potential outlier status or not. This is just a hospital I work at. I'm not going to give the name away, but there's very small numbers of deaths. So again, it doesn't really matter when you've got small numbers of deaths what's going on. You can't tell much from it. But it just gives you an idea of the information we do have available and the information we can provide back to hospitals. And we may be able to provide more in the future if the qualified privilege things are adjusted. This is about patients. And again, I love this picture. This is the old Florence Nightingale Awards again from the RVI. And I just love the fact that the patients and the nurses are all standing to attention. And you just don't get that nowadays. And again, I worked on these sorts of awards. And I don't know whether there's that many of them around, but I'm not in that picture, no. It's about 1950s ad, so it's slightly before my vintage. But we do have patient reps on our committee, and we listen to them very assiduously. Safer Care have got lots and lots of patient reps and get involved in all the publications that are sent out. We were asked to produce a publication for patients, which I thought initially was a bit dodgy because you can't really say to patients, oh, well, we deal with deaths, and here's a thing about if you're going to die in hospital. I think really that's more for the coroner to deal with and also to review problems. But we have produced this document, which is available on our website, and we're looking at a new one for this year, which this has been embargoed, so I'm not allowed to show it to you. But it just really goes on about, I think this is a better document. It's got more pictures, it makes it easier to read, it talks about planning for the future and making sure your wishes are looked into. It doesn't say, don't look for dodgy surgeons or go into the sort of details Steve wants, but it just opens up a few questions. So I think it's something we can work on, something we can improve on in the future. So that's enough about patients. And then finally, this is the team. It is a pretty small team. And if you have any issues, if you want more information, if you want to know how to fill in forms, if you want to know how to interpret forms, ring us up or drop us an email. And the team are very, very happy to talk to anybody, take you through whatever needs to be done, and just try and make the whole process as easy as possible for you. So don't feel frightened of VASM. Everyone's very friendly, everyone's very nice, and hopefully that gives you an idea of where we've been and where we're hopefully going to go in the future. And I think that's around about all I've got to say.